If you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you maybe have picked up on, I don't generally do I told you so, because a lot of times I'm wrong. And if you're new to the podcast, hey, what's up? How's it going? I'm Garrett. Stick around. I think I've done one I've told you so podcast in the history of this show. And it was just when I correctly predicted that Jaden Daniels was going to win the Heisman Trophy in like August of 2023. I said, hey, I was wrong in half my prediction that LSU was going to win the national championship and that Jaden Daniels was going to win the Heisman Trophy. Now, half of that came to fruition, but this is I Told You So episode 2, because I can't help but notice that there are not many Ryan Day deserves to be fired people anymore. I released a podcast after Ohio State lost to Michigan that was titled Why Ohio State Won't and Shouldn't Fire Ryan Day. Now, the won't was the buyout's really high. And if you're going to fire somebody because they continually lose one game while still getting to the college football mountaintop over and over again, it felt like it was a silly decision. But the idea that Ohio State should have fired Ryan Day after the Michigan game was stupid then, and it's stupid now. It's especially stupid now after what Ohio State has accomplished in the playoff. Now, did anybody see that coming? Yeah, kinda, because despite the loss to Michigan, which was bad, it's undeniable. That was a bad loss. There was still a really strong likelihood that Ohio State was at worst the third best team in the playoff. And I don't think you can. I think there are many SEC fans that would love to tell you, well, things would be different if Carson Beck was still. No, they wouldn't. Georgia was not that good with Carson Beck, let alone without him. And that might be the top. It's okay for the SEC to not be the top dog anymore. You can handle it. That might be the conversation tomorrow. But it was dumb to suggest that Ohio State should fire their coach who had won at a higher rate than anybody else in the sport because he lost to the wrong team. If you go back, Brady Hoke didn't get fired from Michigan because he couldn't beat Ohio State. Brady Hoke got fired from Michigan because he's a dumbass. Rich Rodriguez didn't get fired from Michigan because he couldn't beat Ohio State. Rich Rodriguez got fired from Michigan because he had his hand on the wrong cookie jar and wasn't coaching very well. John Cooper didn't get fired from Ohio State because he couldn't beat Michigan. He got fired because the program started to dip and he couldn't beat Michigan. If you go through the annals of the history of that rivalry, you're not going to find coaches who got Jim Harbaugh didn't get fired by Michigan when he continually lost to Ohio State. It just like that doesn't happen in the rivalry. And I think you could make a really strong argument that you shouldn't just be firing dudes because they can't beat the right or wrong team. It seems like a really dumb decision, but I understand the importance of that rivalry. But Ohio State shouldn't have fired Ryan Day or thought about firing Ryan Day after losing to Michigan because, and this was like kind of the seminal point of my argument at the time. If your argument is this guy gets too close to the top of the college football mountaintop, but hasn't got to the only spot where Ohio State is by themselves alone at the top, doesn't it feel inevitable that that's going to happen? And here we sit. Here we sit a month and a half later, I guess probably 2 months later, and Ohio State's at the top of the college football mountaintop. It is always more likely that if you can get just close enough, just right there, it is much more likely that you'll do it eventually rather than never. Rather than it will never happen, it is almost a certainty that if you got there, you are going to do it eventually. There aren't many times, like if you, and I understand that there could be the argument of like, well, do you think TCU and Sonny Dykes are going to get back to the national championship game? Well, no, probably not. But this is different. Ohio State had made the college football playoff continually under Ryan Day. They had played in a national championship under Ryan Day. So one, that kind of undercuts the argument of like, this guy doesn't win big games. Jesus Christ, Ohio State went 2-1 in top 5 games this season. And I would hope that you would think 2 teams ranked in the top 5 going against each other would be counted as a big game. But you can't make it to the national championship game. You can't win the Big Ten. You can't say that the Michigan game every year is a big game when Ryan Day has won against Michigan before and then turn back around and say he doesn't win big games. How in the hell can those things be true? Spoiler alert, they are not. So it always was more close to an inevitability rather than a certainty that it would never happen, that Ohio State was going to win the national championship under Ryan Day. And every other argument again, well, the only time he's been good is with Urban's players. Urban Meyer's been gone for a real long time, especially in a recruiting cycle that turns over significantly faster now than it ever did before. Ohio State won the national championship with Ryan Day's program, with Ryan Day's philosophy, with Ryan Day's offense, with Ryan Day's recruiting class. And to even have ever thought that he should be fired is knee-jerk, illogical, irrational thinking. And I understand that that's what sports does to us, and that's part of the fun, right? Being just illogical and knowing that laundry is what pisses you off is part of the fun of sports. But some point you have to take a step back and think like, okay, let's put this all into perspective. So I shouted from the mountaintops, maybe it was Ryan Day's biggest defender, that like, hey, the idea, the argument, the push for them to, for the Buckeye athletic department, president, the university as a whole, to the idea that they should have pushed him out the door because he lost to Michigan, and really the first game in his tenure that he had no business losing, is asinine. And it was asinine. It's as asinine today as it was the day after Ohio State lost to Michigan. And so this is one of the very rare times, because I don't generally believe that you should think the same way I do. I think part of the fun of college football is differing opinions, differing viewpoints, different perspectives. But this is one of the times that I will say, I told you so. I told you so. And you should have thought the same way I did. I think in my media career, I have said 5 times, you should think the way I think. And this is one of those times. Ryan Day should have never been on the hot seat. I don't think Ryan Day ever was on the hot seat. If you go back and look through my Twitter mentions, there are probably too many of me arguing with people saying he's not on the hot seat. If they lose to Tennessee in the first round, he's not going to get fired. Ryan Day is going to coach the Buckeyes in 2025. And now it's abundantly clear Ryan Day is going to coach the Buckeyes in 2025 unless he decides he'd rather coach the Raiders, Saints, Cowboys, or Jags. That's just the truth. And not only should you be okay with that, if you're an Ohio State fan, you should be really excited about it. I think there are a lot of people who better send an edible arrangement, some bouquet of roses, or just pat the guy on the back the next time I see him in the grocery store because, hey, sorry, I said some things about you that I didn't maybe mean, but I just was pissed off in the moment. Some people owe Ryan Day an apology, and I imagine he's probably too classy to point that out and say, y'all mother bleepers wanted to run me out of town, but now I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, you are, and that's just kind of how sports work sometimes. That'll do it for today's episode of The Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of The Daily Huddle.